Any conversation about apparel production sooner or later includes Bangladesh. From a turbulent period when the nation's industry was plagued by factory fires, building collapses, and high levels of industrial pollution, Bangladesh has faced grueling pressure to meet international standards. Over the past 7 years, it has painstakingly worked to clean up and green up its industry. Today, Bangladesh is home to some of the world's best apparel manufacturing facilities and has the greatest number of LEED certified factories. Yet Bangladesh's image is more of a reflection of its past than a vision of its future. Recently, a growing number of industry experts are starting to shine a new light on what they believe could be an overlooked opportunity for buyers. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. Today we're talking with Deepika Diwan. Deepika has spent 3 decades managing buying, sourcing, and manufacturing for some of the world's biggest retailers. From heading up clothing sourcing in South Asia for Sainsbury's, working with Marks & Spencer in Bangladesh and tripling its business there in less than 5 years, to working as global procurement director for Kiabi and helping Pepcor establish their South Asian sourcing offices, Deepika knows Bangladesh. She also understands the growing need to manage lead times as well as the ongoing pressure on price. Today, Deepika is managing director of Carrots, a consulting company that designs and executes bespoke solutions for international footwear, apparel, and accessories retailers. Years of close-up and personal experience living and working in Bangladesh has enabled her to see Bangladesh for what it is becoming rather than what it was. She's the perfect person to speak with in order to find out what are the big opportunities in Bangladesh, opportunities that others might be missing. Deepika, thank you for taking a seat at the table. When we were speaking a few weeks ago, Deepika, you were telling me that you saw Bangladesh as an opportunity for sourcing high-quality garments, yet most people see it as the go-to place for cheap basics.
My experience of, over 30 years in this industry, other than Sri Lanka, which obviously has many lesser number of factories, but other than Sri Lanka, I've never seen more sophisticated factories than I have seen in Bangladesh. And the sheer number of them, the sheer capacity that they offer, as in terms of good and great factories, is unmatchable in my view across the globe. Like I said, Sri Lanka has great factories, but then they can't match the capacity. If you look at many other countries, including Pakistan, India, China, Vietnam, I'd say Ethiopia, Cambodia, I'd say they will all have one or the other, but not everything together. In my view, Bangladesh is the answer to most of our problems in the clothing industry.
That's interesting. Could you tell me a little bit more about why you see it as the answer?
If you look at the simple parameters in terms of price, delivery, quality, CSR, sustainability, flexibility, and attitude, then I'd say in terms of price, Bangladesh offers obviously one of the best price thresholds in the world. And most people are aware of that. I'm not saying anything new there. Quality as well, I think most people know the amount of work that has been done. And this is thanks to us, the retailers who've gone in there, who've employed people, opened offices. And then we come to delivery and flexibility. Whatever I'm saying obviously comes from what I have learned. So in my experience, their delivery performance, when I would rate them in my past lives, when I was with Kiabi or M&S or Sainsbury's, when I would rate Bangladesh against different countries, most of the time, they would be top. Of course, they have all the acts of God kind of things coming in, whether of floods. And I saw how the entrepreneur of the country dealt with it. Even during those times, during floods, I would say deliveries would on time. So that makes me respect the country massively. Going on to the CSR work that they do, there's Bangladesh now has about 2,500 to 3,000 factories. It obviously changes every month, every week. And about 10% of them are LEED certified. Again, another 500 factories will be LEED certified over the next year or so. Now, that's massive. When you talk about out of 3,000, if 800 are LEED certified in the next 1.5 years, then I don't know which other country, going back to your point of, are they world savvy? Are they comparable to other countries in the world? I'd say, completely. I don't know any other country which has such a big capacity and which is also then creating beautiful factories which are great for the workers, factories which are dealing with sustainable raw material, factories which give attendance bonuses and productivity bonuses, provide food to their workers. They have creches for children because obviously, as you know, 85% of the workforce in Bangladesh is women. To top it all, it's the resilience of the worker, the owner, the entrepreneur, which completely bowls me over. I have not seen that attitude in any other country. I don't want to name and shame, but most other countries that I work with, always, even if we're trying to send them the best knowledge and the best talent from anywhere in the globe, they would have this attitude of either not wanting to learn, saying we know best, or even worse, saying we will, but then not establishing the changes that we are trying to request. And I think this is the biggest reason Bangladesh has grown the way it has.
So what you're saying then is that in Bangladesh, the factory owner is humble and hungry, and so therefore they're much more willing to take suggestions. For example, they're eager to learn new things, to be adaptive.
Absolutely. The way you see those factories set up now is if you look at the history of the country in the 80s when the industry started there, which was actually set up by Koreans, and the first factory was called Desh Garments. But since then, in these 40 odd years, they've come such a long way to have massive LEED certified factories, to have green factories, which are beyond the imagination of people, is no mean feat, I would say,
for sure,
in a span of 35 to 40 years. One of the reasons why the growth catapulted so much in the last few years is obviously, as the whole world knows, and the Rana Plaza tragedy, which struck in 2013, and the Tazreen fire, which was just a few months before that. I think those two tragedies written the future 7 years, as in from 2013 to 2020, was basically writ because of those two tragedies that happened. Not only did the government want the country's name to be free of the blemish, but also I think the retailers, because we were so dependent on Bangladesh at that time. We really wanted to make a difference, to make sure that something like this should never happen. Interestingly, up until then, there were about 5,000 factories in the country. And over 7 years, the number of factories has actually come down. However, the bigger ones have expanded. So the overall capacity, I'd say, is actually still the same or even increasing. But they have completely wiped out, thanks to Alliance, thanks to Accord, thanks to BGMEA working there, thanks to all the NGOs, ILO, you name it. Everyone's involved in that country. And it's because of all of that they've now been able to, they're at a stage where we could clearly say they're, if not better, then at least comparable with the best.
That's really interesting, Deepika. I think most people see Bangladesh as what it was instead of what it's becoming. You have the unique vantage point of having hands-on opportunity to witness the evolution of its manufacturing industry.
That is one of the reasons you and I are having this conversation. Because the more we give out information, the more we educate the world, the more we're able to expose what is happening in Bangladesh, the more people, professionals like me, will want to go there.
Right. So why is it then, when you talk to people in the industry, most people would put Bangladesh on the least favorite place to go to? I'm just curious from your point of view why that might be.
Well, it definitely is everybody's least favorite place to go to. I'd say it doesn't really offer anything at all except the expat clubs where you can go and sit in the evening and chat with people like yourselves. And all you do is work throughout the day and the evening, because even in the evenings, you meet only people from the clothing industry. There's nowhere to go to. The eye candy is not there on the streets. You see poor people because it is a poor country. What do you do about that?
Right.
But in terms of working, I think it's a myth. If at all, the kind of, even the offices that have been established there now. You talk of any retailer and they have huge setups there. They are, in spite of all the press that they've been receiving, the kind of tussle that's been going on between the numbers from Vietnam and Bangladesh, Bangladesh still continues to be the second largest exporter of clothing to the world. And they wouldn't have reached there if they were not a good country to work with. And I obviously say that from my own personal experiences. Having worked with China, Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, all of these countries, I see that in Bangladesh, the biggest difference is their ability to cope and grow. And that's what's taking them places. I really don't know why they are still considered to be below par. In my view, they are way above par. Out of the 3,000 factories that I just mentioned, I would rate about 40% of them as grade A minus. And that's a huge number.
Bangladesh is thought of as being the place you go to because it's the cheapest of the cheap. And, that includes obviously a low wage, the lowest in the region, and also the fact that it has duty-free access to the EU. So generally speaking, it's seen by most people that Bangladesh's key advantage is price. Now, you're saying that Bangladesh factories are state-of-the-art and are certainly the grade A ones are for sure. But you're sort of putting Bangladesh on a par with some of the other nations, including Vietnam. Now, if Bangladesh was charging Vietnam prices and did not have duty-free access, so therefore all things being equal, would Bangladesh still come out on top?
Yeah, I think you see the minimum wage being so low actually has historically been their biggest asset.
Yes.
That is the reason they started becoming who they are. But that was only the starting point. As of now, their relationship with all the countries that supply fabric to them is so strong. As you know, they don't have much of their own fabric. They don't grow their own cotton, basically. So they're widely dependent on Pakistan, India, even America for their cotton fabrics, China as well. And then, of course, not just cotton. They've gone into polyester now. They've gone into all kinds of man-made fibers. You'll be surprised to hear. There's a small incident I want to tell you about. When I first set up the Sainsbury's office, one of the heads of buying at that time gave us women's T-shirts as our first order. And I'm talking about 2010, 10 years ago, when women's was not such a big business in Bangladesh. And so she wanted a yarn-dyed striped women T-shirt in several different colorways. What the supplier did was he found a way out where he gave me a polyester cotton stripe, which when you single dye comes out with different colorways. And he got all the colorways approved. And when the order got confirmed, within 45 days, and that was the very first order we shipped out from the Sainsbury's office in Bangladesh to the UK. Within 45 days, we were able to ship out 6 colorways, about 25 to 30,000 pieces. I don't remember how small or big it was. And all approvals were done by the UK.
Wow.
Simply because, first of all, they were innovative. They found a way, the supplier found a way to come up with the same thing that the buyer was looking for, but without going into yarn dyeing. They came up with a polyester cotton option, which we hadn't thought of as Sainsbury's. And then they made sure they got all the approvals done on time. Of course, we helped as well. If we hadn't given the approvals, it wouldn't have been done. But, 45 days.
Yeah, that's very fast.
And this is 10 years ago. When you can get women's blouses, when you can get embroideries, which only India and China have been known for historically, when you can get viscose trousers, then I don't think we are talking only basics or only core items. We're definitely looking at fashion. Maybe not the highest notch of fashion, but definitely a lot of fashion, a lot of flexibility, a lot of shorter lead times, which, as you know, is the key message nowadays.
That's right.
All retailers want to cut their lead times by as much as possible. They want to pay as late as possible. They want as little inventory as possible. Usually, again, the myth is that because Turkey is closest to Europe, it's easier to just bring it by road from Turkey.
Right,
and,
right.
But that's really not so true anymore. We've done, my team and I, we did exercises where we compared as long as we're giving them approvals on time, as long as we're planning capacity in advance. And for knits, it doesn't even, you don't even have to give any basic fabric approvals in advance. But for wovens, we were giving bitloom approvals in advance. If we were giving lab dip approvals in advance, then as soon as you confirm the colorways and the number of pieces, they can actually ship within 30 days to 60 days, depending on the fabric. If it is local fabric, then 6 weeks. If it is imported fabric, 8 to 10 weeks sometimes. Again, depends on what kind of fabrics it are. For instance, knitwear, sweaters, bring in grade yarn, and they would dye it locally. So you just pick out the yarn and tell them what you want. And then you can choose colors, you can choose fits, you can choose any kind of embroideries or printing that you want on the sweater. All of that just brings it brings your price down, it brings your lead times down. It just makes sure that things are moving at a better margin. I mean, the biggest issue in the business, why are we there? We want to make money.
Of course.
And if we bring it in from Turkey within a few weeks, but then we have to pay more, then I'm sorry, my balance sheet doesn't give me anything great at the end of the year. My shareholders are not very happy with me. So what do I need to do? I need to get the best of both worlds. I need great prices, excellent margin, and I need shorter lead times. Even when we used to air goods at times, we would still come out cheaper than the neighboring countries.
Oh, really?
That's how interesting it was.
You had mentioned Turkey earlier, and certainly for the EU, Turkey is a very important source. It has the skills. It has also the proximity to market. How would you compare then Turkey to Bangladesh, given that Turkey obviously is nearer to the market, and also now with the depreciation of the lira, that's had to have brought prices down as well?
Yeah, it's absolutely. Turkey's prices are down as compared to earlier. But going back to what I was saying earlier, it's the hunger, the organized way of working, the capacity, and the desire to grow in this particular industry. That's what makes Bangladesh unbeatable. I tried last year, in fact, I tried to move some simple sock business to Turkey from China. And I wasn't able to because their prices weren't competitive. And even though the lira has depreciated, like you said, I was very keen. My team wanted to move. We said, sure, let's go to a country which is going to be cheaper now. Sorry, they weren't. So again, I have nothing against any country, by the way. I mean, I want to be very clear on this podcast. I'm not dissing anyone.
Right, of course.
It's just very important for us to be able to see the reality in spite of amazing quality and delivery and CSR work being done. I think the only reason Bangladesh is not seen as amazing as they are is simply because it's not a great place to go to. Turkey, I'm happy going to Turkey as a buyer. It's fun to go. I'm going to place some business. I'm going to treat it as short lead time country. I can go every few weeks. I'm sorry, I don't like going to Bangladesh as a buyer. It's a longer flight. It's not great hotels, even though a lot of hotels have come up now. It's not great shopping.
Well, I understand what you mean, because when you're in a country that's on the upward trajectory of a growth curve, there tends to be an optimism and an energy and an enthusiasm, and as you had said, a humility and eagerness to learn. And not only is that, of course, a very good thing in terms of driving an industry or a business forward, but also it's a very enjoyable and I feel a very enriching environment to work in. What's your big future vision for Bangladesh?
A few visions I have. One, of course, is that their other industries should grow. They're so hugely dependent on clothing. Like India used to be, completely dependent on clothing up until 50 years ago.
Right, but if Bangladesh does diversify like that, and most likely it will, because other industries will start to come in there, if no other reason, to take advantage, right, of a lower cost and large labor force, how will that impact the apparel industry? Because now they'll have to compete for workers.
Jane, even today, out of the 4 million to 5 million, 4.5 to 5 million workers that work in this industry, directly work in this industry, I'd say 10 to 15% are jobless. They want to work and they don't have work. It's the same for the capacities in the factories. So I don't know if going into other avenues will take away from the workforce from this industry. In the next 20 years, their population, which is at the moment about 170 million, will go up to 200 million.
Do you think that if we're looking just at the apparel industry alone, and given what you've said about the high level of competitiveness that you believe Bangladesh offers for apparel manufacturing, and right now, of course, most buyers are even more pressed on price and on shorter leads and so forth. So if more and more business moves into Bangladesh, is there enough capacity at compliant factories?
Every time I go to Bangladesh, I see new factories mushrooming out. In fact, I'm surprised and I ask them, when you don't have enough business, why do you keep making factories? And their simple answer is no, only when we make the capacity will the business come. So capacity is not an issue at all. And like I said earlier, their A-grade capacity, I would say, matches the A-grade capacity of China, which is the largest clothing exporter to the world, and largest by far. So their capacity would, even though their number of factories are lesser, but the best number of factories is equivalent to what China has. And there's more coming every day. During COVID, they've lost business. They had a plan to be at 50 billion exports by next year, by 2022. And they've actually been adding capacity based on that. So they have so much to offer, but the world is not there. The world is not as much there as it should be.
What do you mean by the world is not as much there as it should be? Could you explain?
So a lot of retailers, as we said earlier, are afraid to go there because I think up until 20 years ago, it wasn't a dependable country, which you said as well. They would book business and not deliver. They would take the cheapest prices and then come back later and say, oh, no, sorry, I booked at a wrong price. I need the price to be revised. So there is a history. And I'm not denying that. They've been through a tough time. They've been learning. They made a lot of mistakes. And due to the natural forces, due to the floods and the cyclones that they had, they would have delivery delays earlier. They would have issues. They were not the best quality country up until 2 decades ago. So many people have that in mind. Many people feel that, oh my God, no, I went there 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and I burnt my fingers. I'm not going back there. They'll be surprised. That's one. Second, the reason I said the world is not as much there as it should be is because a lot of people are still treating them as a country for basics. So they'll go there, they'll put their £9 denim or their $10 jeans or their T-shirts, the $5, $10 T-shirts, but not really the mid-level or the high-level merchandise. Now, that's where I would recommend that people go in there and people try and see what happens. You don't have to put everything there. The science of sourcing is that very simple. Open up your own offices, put your own people there. The biggest issue for that country is agents who are, just because people like us are afraid to go there, we go through our own local agents. If you're a British retailer, I'm going to hire a British agent who comes to my office every day or every week, and I get a lot of comfort seeing him, and I feel, all right, my goods are in the right hands, my goods are being produced fine, I don't need to travel to any place, these guys are taking care. Now, the truth is actually, the agents sat in between are actually going to the worst factories in the world.
Why is that?
Well, because they need to make money. How are they going to survive in between? So they will go to a cheaper factory, which you probably as a retailer will not get to know. There's going to be a factory shown to you, but something else where actually goods are being produced. There's going to be a price given to you, but they're probably buying it at 20, 30, 40% cheaper. So this is where we need to be, as retailers, we need to go there ourselves. Now, the new thing that Bangladesh are doing, it just came back to my mind, is that they're all setting up design offices in different countries across the globe, which again, a lot of other countries are not doing. So because, there's that saying that if the if the mullah doesn't come to the Mecca will go to mullah.
Right,
I'm saying a Muslim saying because Bangladesh is a Muslim country.
right,
But
right.
basically, they're saying, all right, buyers, you don't want to come to us, we will come to you. They have offices, design offices in most countries that you can name, even in newer countries where they've started doing business like South Africa, like Australia.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, and I think that, there is a lot of value in going in person, in sort of getting your hands in the clay. And experiencing for yourself and really understanding, even if you are working with an agent, but also to be a little bit closer and more involved.
Absolutely.
So in terms of infrastructure, that's another thing that a lot of people point to, and quite rightly, when they talk about Bangladesh. And, as we all know, the port situation there is not as good as other countries. What's your feeling on that? Because oftentimes you can have a manufacturer who has a state-of-the-art factory. He's doing everything on point, but then you still have to ship the goods, and that's really beyond his control.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid point you've raised, and a question that has been bothering most of us as retailers for the last several years. The issues with the port are actually manifold. There is infrastructural issues as well as worker union or corruption issues. By that, I mean, the merchandise could be in Bangladesh, but the supplier may not be able to take it simply because it's in queue. There's other merchandise before that which needs to be pulled out. When I say merchandise, I mean fabric, raw material.
Right, yes.
Because their port is used two ways, right? You need to bring in fabric as well as ship out goods.
Exactly.
Which is a problem most other countries don't have when they produce their own fabrics.
Yes.
So with Bangladesh, the merchandise, even if it's lying in the port, there will be days and days when the supplier may not be able to get it. And the infrastructural issues add to it. Now, how they find answers to that is, number one, they've added cranes to the port in the last few years, and there's more being added. The more cranes you have, the more you're able to pick up the merchandise and move it around. There's expansion going on at the Chittagong port. There's unions over there, which the government is dealing with. There's corruption, which I don't know how they deal with it, actually. There's corruption across the globe. So I'm not educated enough to be able to talk about that. But for some reason, I've never had to face any delays due to merchandise coming in or going out. So they must be having a way of dealing with it. Coming back to the actual expansion. So there are two new ports that have been under construction for the last few years. One of them is operational now. The Mangala port is actually operational now. But at the moment, it's only being used for everything other than clothing.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the reason for that is that when you're shipping out merchandise, when the trucks that take your merchandise to the port go with your stuff, they also need to come back with stuff. So because that port hasn't started receiving merchandise from abroad yet, as in imports haven't started there yet for clothing, that's the reason exports for clothing also haven't started. It's a two-way road.
Mm.
There's a bridge that's being constructed between Dhaka and Mongla, which is called the Podda Bridge. Once that is operational, the roads will be much easier to commute with. I think in the next 2 years, that port should be fully operational. Of course, there are other ports being constructed, deep sea ports being constructed as well, which I don't think will happen in the next decade at least. But when that happens, then you don't need feeder vessels. You can actually have mother vessels coming in.
Right, that would be very good.
Yeah, that I'm talking about really long term. But in the short term, like I said, they've got a two-pronged approach to it. They're bandaging it from the top and they're trying to construct more from the bottom. So there's capacity being added at the Chittagong port. There's more cranes being bought. They've taken away the cars, all the government work from the Chittagong port, so that has created more space for clothing. And then once Mongla starts coming up, which is again in the next 2 years, that's going to ease the situation a lot as well. But you are right. That is an issue at the moment.
So a lot of people who are working with Bangladesh will use air probably more often than they might if they're, let's say, working out of China. What are you seeing with that, and is that an option, a cost-efficient option?
Well, it depends. If you need the merchandise quickly enough, if you haven't done your job in terms of giving the approvals on time or planning on time, or your customer, the final customer, turned out to be different than what you envisaged, you're selling something very different to what you had planned to sell, then absolutely, why not? Air freight it. My job as a retailer is to sell as much as I can, even if I need to bring the price down a little bit, bring my margin down a little bit. The story is the more I sell, the more money I make. So yes, air freight is always an option, but I would say I'd keep that as a last resort, because I'm giving away money to someone who has nothing to do with my industry when I air freight my merchandise. I'd rather give a higher price to the supplier and have him add more value to the garment, or I'd rather give that much money back to the customer, or I'd rather make the garment sustainable. But giving it to an air freight company or to an airline is not my preferred route. Having said that, there is a lot of air freight happening from both ends. Even when suppliers are late, they air freight as well.
Right.
And airlines have come up with options too. You have airlines which go through cheaper countries, and yet they have great routes, great connectivity, which ensures the merchandise reaches on time. So work is being done in that area as well. So in a way, actually, it's a good point you raised, because airlines have worked very well with Bangladesh, which they're not doing with many other countries. They see the potential there. So they try and build a relationship and routes which are more workable than most other countries.
Makes sense. In terms of looking at Bangladesh and the issue of having a domestic supply of raw materials, which again has been a key advantage to China as a massive garment producer, what are you seeing as the potentiality of more mill investment? Because after all, a mill investment is very capital intensive and is a much longer term investment compared to building a sewing factory.
Yeah, so again, it depends on what kind of mills you're talking about. When I first set up the M&S office in 2006, they only had a handful of mills, just even to produce simple basic denims, twills, canvases, woven bottom fabrics. Today, I think they have about 200 mills. When I say 200 mills, I'm only talking about woven fabrics, which contains yarn dyes, dyeing, weaving of fabrics, spinning mills, all of that. On knits, of course, on jersey, their mill capacity is huge because most of the jersey factories are backward integrated. They have their own knitting facilities, they have their own dyeing facilities. Some of them even have their own spinning facilities. I think on knits, no one is worried about their backward integration.
Right.
It's the wovens which used to be a worry, and they're still not there fully. They still need a lot of more work to be done. But I'd say compared to 10 to 15 years ago, like I said, there were about 5 to 6 mills, and now there are about 200. I mean, talk about growth. The only area which I'd say they still need to work on is actually yarn dyeing facilities for woven fabric and all over printing. They have all over printing and yarn dyeing, but not enough. When you talk about man-made fibers, no, they don't have enough capacity on fabric. They have a few mills which produce polyesters, but basic. They're still importing a lot of viscose polyesters or mixed yarns, any kind of yarns that you want to talk about. That's an area where they need to expand. But it's a chicken and egg story. Like they have so many factories already ready, garment factories, but the business hasn't grown the way they thought it would grow. They thought they would be at 50 billion today. They're only at 27 billion.
Why do you think that is? What do you think has held them back from growing?
I'd say it's an amalgamation of all of these questions that you've been asking me. It's people's fears. It's the lack of trust in the port. It's the worry that they would get bad press if they got caught in an uncompliant factory. I must say the press hasn't been kind to that country at all.
Do you think it hasn't been kind, which is more of an emotional type of thing, or do you think it has not been completely accurate?
Yeah, you say it better than I do, actually. The press has been picking up things which sensationalize the clothing industry, and Bangladesh has been an easy target.
I happen to agree with you, Deepika, but unfortunately, the media is driven by clicks, and bad news and disasters get a lot more views than good news. Once you believe something, it's easier to just keep believing it. than it is to have to go back and reevaluate and determine whether that still holds true. And in the case of Bangladesh, people see it for what it was, not for what it's become. So combine that with the fact that bad news gets more views, and you can see why Bangladesh is stuck in that trap.
I think the two most important things that I would say at the end is Bangladesh is not just cheap garments. It's not just about your basics and cores. It's about fashion, it's about flexibility, it's about getting the best value for your garment, but at the same time, getting a great garment as well. As long as we plan, as long as we are able to plan the fabric in advance, plan the capacity in advance. Those are the two most important things. So that's number one. And number two, I'd like to say that Bangladesh is not shoddy factories. It's actually amazing factories. It's LEED certified factories. It's green factories. So let's take that badge away from them of cheap, shoddy country. It's not. That's the only thing I'd like to say in the end.
Looking ahead, Bangladesh, in fact, may be able to pick up more orders as you said, China and India become more self-sufficient, and therefore, I'm not saying don't export anymore, but start to export less. And therefore, anybody who needs to import would need to look for capacity outside of India and China.
Yes, I think all expansion should happen outside of India and China, and both have their own unique reasons. But yes, I would say between Bangladesh, Vietnam, and then the upcoming Ethiopia, which is still a very little baby, it's in its nascent stages. But these are the countries that we should be looking at for expanding our sourcing horizons.
I think it's interesting to see what you're saying, that how Bangladesh could actually be the dark horse that becomes, instead of the just the place to go to for cheap, it will be the place that you want to go to for better.
Absolutely. I have moved so much fashion business into Bangladesh in my past lives, sometimes against the willingness of my peers in the selling countries, in the head offices, sometimes with their support. But each time we have been successful. Every time we moved a category from another country to Bangladesh, we were pleasantly surprised. I don't have any stories of being let down, actually. You know, I've been thinking as I've been talking to you, if there's one negative story that I could tell, just to balance things off perhaps, but I can't think of anything at all where they might have let me down massively and other countries took that business and did it better. None.
It's really been interesting talking to you, and it's certainly broadened my view of Bangladesh.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this chat.
A pleasure. What's your biggest supply chain challenge? Please let us know in the comments section. If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, please subscribe to our podcast, where you'll get to hear from some of the industry's leaders and innovators. And if you're looking for an easier way to keep up to date on sourcing shifts, new technologies, supply chain strategies, emerging markets, and of course e-commerce, head on over to our website, insidefashionlive.net. and consider subscribing to our weekly newsletters. You'll also find all of our contact information there. Please feel free to contact us with any ideas, suggestions, or questions. That's insidefashionlive.net.